Yes, we are so thrilled to have two presentations this morning. The first is from Mr. Alan Breed and Ms. Robin White. Mr. Breed is the great-grandson of Dr. Bowman Bigelow Breed, who was the very first surgeon at Tovis. He's a 10th-generation native of Lynn, Massachusetts, and he joined the Associated Press in 1988 and is currently a national writer for the Wire service based in Raleigh, North Carolina. Ms. White is a retired Foreign Service officer who served in Morocco, Canada, and Japan. She continues to take an active interest in U.S.-Japanese affairs. She lives in Washington, D.C. with her husband, Nathaniel P. Breed Jr., also the great-grandson of Dr. Breed, and his wife, Hannah Hope Breed. Alan and Robin recently published their ancestors' Civil War correspondence. The book is titled My Own Dear Wife, A Yankee Couple's Civil War. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Breed and Ms. White.
Good afternoon. In the fall of 1866, the federal government tasked General Edward Winslow Hanks with establishing the first national home for disabled volunteer soldiers. One of the first orders of business was to find a top-notch surgeon who could appreciate what these men had been through in the service of their country. Hanks knew just the man for the job. The Bucksport, Maine native was working as a printer in Lynn, Massachusetts 5 years earlier when the Confederates opened fire on Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor. As adjutant of the 8th Massachusetts Volunteer Militia, it was Hank's job to fill his unit's quota when President Lincoln issued the call for all loyal citizens to favor, facilitate, and aid in this effort to maintain the honor, the integrity, and the existence of our national union. Dr. Bowman Bigelow Breed was among the first to volunteer. Over the past several years, my cousin Robin here and I have had the honor and privilege of transcribing, editing, and earlier this fall, publishing the Civil War correspondence of Bowman and Hannah Breed, my great-grandparents. It was only after we'd begun the process that we learned of Bowman's special place in the history of the VA.
Bowman was born in Lynn on February 29, 1832, the 8th of 10 children, born to Isaiah Breed, a wealthy shoe manufacturer. Of naturally poor constitution, according to one acquaintance, Bowman early evinced a studious disposition which was encouraged by his parents. He studied at a small private school in Lynn until he was 14, then enrolled at Phillips Academy, and then matriculated at Amherst. He finally, in July 1857, left the Massachusetts Medical College at Harvard with the degree of MD. Bowman then traveled to Europe, spending the first 3 months in Dublin at the renowned Rotunda Hospital, also known as the Dublin Lying-In Hospital. He then continued to Edinburgh and Paris, but in the spring of 1859, he was called home to see his dying father.
Soon after that, Bowman married his sister Lucilla's best friend, 31-year-old schoolteacher Hannah Pope of Danvers. It was a true love match. In December of 1860, she gave birth to their first child, Isaiah. Little Isa was not yet 4 months old when the Confederates besieged Fort Sumter in April of 1861. The impulse to remain at home with his new wife and infant son must have been very powerful. But there seems to have been no question but that Bowman would go to war. He was descended from a long line of patriots. His grandfather, Francis Moore, was among those who threw tea overboard in Boston's harbor in 1773, not disguised as an Indian, I might add. Like the rest of us in the family, he was well aware that the Battle of Bunker Hill was actually fought on Breed's Hill. So staying out of the war was not an option for him. Bowman would later write to Hannah, "I pity the shame of those who 20 years from now shall have some little one say, 'Papa, what was you in the war?' Oh, nothing, child. I wasn't there. Business was too brisk, so I paid my $300 and stayed at home." He said, "We bear an honored name, and my ambition is to transmit it at least unsullied."
But it's clear from the letters that Hannah was no less a patriot than her husband, and that he couldn't have served without her support. Although she often cursed what she called this wicked, wicked war, she understood Bowman's need to be part of it. During his first 3-month enlistment with the 8th Massachusetts, she wrote, "I know, and you, sadly as I miss you, that I would not for a moment wish you to do anything in the least dishonorable. May God help us both to bear this separation. bring us together again in his own good time, better prepared for life's duties than ever before. Within 5 hours of Lincoln's call, Lynn had raised and armed 2 full companies. The morning of April 16th, Bowman boarded a train for Boston. Sitting alone in his room at the American House that evening, he laid aside the new revolver his brother had given him and took up his pen to make the first installment on a promise he and Hannah had made to each other, to write every day, even if just a line.
I am in such a world that I can hardly think, much less write. You have not been out of my thoughts a minute since we parted. Pray the good God to bless us both and guard our treasure. I can't write anymore. The regiment made it safely past the Southern sympathizers in Baltimore to Washington, D.C. The 8th were quartered at the Capitol in the Hall of the Dome. About noon on April 28th, President Lincoln and Secretary of State William Seward made a visit there. Here's how Bowman described it to Hannah. We were all introduced and had quite a chat with them. They were both in good spirits. Lincoln said that if the city had been as unprotected then as it was a week before, it would have been taken. The regiment was then drawn up in line, and the president made them a little speech. All that has ever been said of Lincoln's awkwardness is mild compared with the reality. Some of his gestures would make the fortune of a circus clown. The men gave 3 cheers for Lincoln, 3 for Seward, and 3 for the Union.
Bowman hadn't been in Washington long before he got the lay of things. I've been on the run ever since I came here trying to arrange matters, but red tape rules here, and I've been referred from one to the other till I'm tired out. But things brightened when he learned that Dorothea Dix of New York had taken charge. She is an uncommonly vinegar-faced philanthropist, he told Hannah, but if she helps me out of this soup, I'm her friend. His initial 3-month enlistment was uneventful, with one exception. In early July, he accompanied a small force into the Maryland countryside to capture men who'd been raising troops for the Confederacy. He told Hannah that was when he realized this would not be a short war. His wife's cries filled the whole house. She was so excited that she flourished a pistol out the window and threatened to shoot the men guarding the house. You cannot imagine the bitterness of their hatred of the North, and especially of the volunteer. We shall whip them, but I cannot see how this will end the strife. It will be long years before the blood, stirred to fever heat, will cool.
But Bowman still had hope for healing. In a speech to his men in a camp outside the restive city of Baltimore, Bowman compared what was happening to a relatively new medical procedure he had witnessed while studying in Europe. I told them about the operation for the transfusion of blood, in which blood is taken from the arm of a strong man and injected into the arm of the patient, he wrote to Hannah, comparing this to the blood shed in Baltimore, rousing the life and vital energies of the nation. When his 3 months were up, Bowman returned to Lynn, where he was appointed medical examiner of volunteers. He returned to his duties on the school committee and did his part to help gather necessities for the boys who were still fighting in the field. His part of the war might have ended there, were it not for the nagging sense of duty and family honor. In March 1862, he received an assignment as the acting assistant surgeon of Washington's Circle Hospital. By then, Hannah was several months pregnant with their 2nd child. The hospital was located in a house just off Washington Circle, just a few blocks from the White House. It was while he was stationed there that his cousin, Congressman John B. Alley, took him for a private visit with the president. It was April 15, 1862, and we thought his letter home about the visit was worth reading at length.
The president always looked shabby, but last night he was outrageous. The buttons were all off his shirt bosom, which gaped open so that you could see his flannel shirt. His pants were greasy, and his slippers rusty and broken down at the heel. His hair, of course, was flying in every direction. We all took our seats, and the president, drawing up a chair, put his legs on it and stretched himself out comfortably. I might add that Hannah wrote back, "What's the matter with Mrs. Lincoln? Why doesn't she take better care of his clothes?" While they were there, Lincoln's son Brad came in. His father called him and took him up onto his lap. He stretched himself out to his full length and put on his father's spectacles. I wish you could have seen the pair. It was hard work to keep a sober face. But the talk then turned to the action at Yorktown. Lincoln declared, We've got a big job on our hands and must manage it carefully. It will never do to have another Bull Run. That, after all, was a small affair, not worth half the fuss it made, but its effect was terrible, and it won't do to repeat it. At that point, Senator Henry Wilson of Massachusetts came in and whispered something in Lincoln's ear about signing the bill emancipating slaves in the District of Columbia. "Confound it," said Mr. Lincoln, "you fellows have taken your own time in framing this bill. Now give me my time to sign it. The Constitution allows me 10 days, and only 2 of them have gone by." Mr. Alley asked him if he did not agree with the terms of his recommendation. "No," he said, "it does not. It does not provide for a vote of the people of the district, and it is a sudden and not gradual emancipation." He hinted that he considered the bill untimely. What was the necessity of this sudden action? God knows I wish to see every slave in this land free, but we have got a mighty work on our hands. If the border states leave us, we can never accomplish it. And it is a serious question whether these exciting questions should be thrust before us quite at this period. Bowman told Hannah that Lincoln clearly had a mind of his own and would act as he thought right. And in fact, he signed the bill the next day.
Back at home, the soldiers' wives formed a support network of their own, as they do now. Hannah had become fast friends with Annie Hinks, the colonel's wife. In late June 1862, Hinks was badly wounded at the Battle of Glendale during the Army of the Potomac's Peninsula campaign. Hinks recovered, but 2 months later, his wife was dead. Hannah had recently given birth to their second child, Bowman Sinclair. Little Isa had been chronically ill, and the new baby was colicky. Suffering from a clear case of postpartum depression, Annie Hinks' death was the last straw for Hannah. "Oh, I cannot make it true. Oh, if you were only here. I cannot bear to talk or speak of it to anyone." But the war was going very badly for the North, and they both knew that Bowman could not come home. From the Circle Hospital, Bowman was transferred to the Armory Square Hospital made so famous by the poet Walt Whitman. From his rooms there, Bowman could hear the cannonading from the Second Battle of Bull Run. Over the next several days, the battle would come even closer. "What a Sunday," he wrote to Hannah on September 8, 1862. "All day long operating, going from one ward to another, cutting off arms and legs, sometimes 2 or 3 operating at once." In a previous letter, Hannah had told Bowman of the rumors that the Confederates would soon take the capital. Bowman said he had no time for newspapers. "I have no idea that the city is in any danger," he wrote, "but if the rebels do come, they will find us hard at work." For the first year of the war, Bowman was a staunch supporter of General George McClellan and his leadership of the Army of the Potomac. But by the summer of 1862, he was having serious doubts. When will our rulers realize that this is a life and death struggle? Every event, however, seems to show that rulers and armies are mere instruments in the hands of the great master, who is leading us through this baptism of blood to a brighter and purer national life. It is well, perhaps, that McClellan's career has not been entirely a success. He would have had more than a Washington's temptations, with perhaps not half of his patriotism.
Bowman was at Armory Hospital when the Battle of Antietam was fought on September 17, 1862, the single bloodiest day in the nation's military history. He was among the surgeons sent to Maryland to treat the wounded. Hinks, then in command of the 19th Massachusetts Infantry, was wounded twice in the battle. The papers reported that the wounds were mortal, but then Hannah had learned not to trust what she read in the news. We've had so many different reports we can hardly credit anything. In late September, Bowman received a letter from a gentleman in Chicopee asking what he should tell women interested in signing up as nurses. He told them to apply to his old patron, Miss Dix, and was characteristically blunt. "Those who are or have been married and have some experience in nursing are preferred. They are assigned to duty in the hospitals in the proportion of 1 female to 2 males. Their compensation is 40 cents per diem, quarters, and 1 ration. Their duties are not to assist the surgeons, but the sick, to obey orders and conform to the regulations of these military hospitals." Irksome, perhaps, at first, but yielded to gracefully as their necessity becomes apparent, to labor all day and sometimes all night. performing duties always difficult and sometimes extremely unpleasant, to live in the midst of suffering, disease, and death, to check the impatient, cheer the despondent, and pray for the dying. This is not inviting, perhaps, but it is a true position. If any feel qualified for and are willing to accept the responsibilities of such a position, Godspeed them in their work.
From the Armory Hospital, Bowman was moved to the Finley Hospital at H Street and Maryland Avenue. It was a former cavalry barracks that Whitman described as a veritable town of wounds, sickness, and death. It was while stationed there that Bowman learned of Ice's death on October 10, 1862. The boy had been sick for months, and Bowman was clearly guilty about not being home to tend to him. Bowman returned to Lynn to bury his son and comfort his wife. Later, he poured out his grief in a letter to Hannah. That feeling of which I told you, that he did not know me and loved others better than me, has all gone. And though I could not be with him and hear his doo-doo papa, yet I could lay his little body in the casket and help you to bear in that sad hour. The tears will come. They blind and choke me as I write.
The tears are on the page of that letter, and I could never make my way through it without crying myself. Bowman had just gotten back to Washington when he learned that he was ordered to the port city of New Bern, North Carolina as purveyor. He immediately began lobbying Hannah to join him. New Bern is not a desert. There are quite a number of ladies here. Plenty of things can be bought here, but they're expensive, so you better bring plates, knives, half a dozen silver forks, spoons, teacups, etc. Bring sheets and pillowcases. I can get blankets and pillows. We have very good tea, coffee, and cocoa. Now, darling, come. Other ladies have come, but none that I know of with a little child. She had suffered greatly from the separation, so around Christmas she and baby Bowman Sinclair joined him. When she arrived, he was taking part in the Goldsboro-Kinston expedition. It was the only true military action in which he participated, but as he told Hannah, that one battlefield experience left him perfectly satisfied and he never wishes to see another. But there was more personal tragedy at home. A little more than 2 months later, Bowman would be dead at 11 months old. "Oh, Mother," Hannah wrote on May 16th, "I believe that I know that the loving dealing of a father has written us childless, but I am still waiting, and I know I am not waiting in vain for the heart to feel this. The heart cries out for our baby, oh, our baby. Yet should God say to us this day, will you, that I give you back our little one, we could only say, oh, Father, ask us not to choose, let thy will, not ours, be done."
The baby's coffin was shipped north, and Hannah soon followed. But duty required that Bowman remain in the South. When Hannah informed him that a relative was planning to come south to start a school for freed slaves, Bowman exploded. Bowman and Hannah were clearly opposed to slavery. Bowman often wrote of teaching his black attendants to read and write and praising the work ethics of the contraband assigned to his hospitals. But it was also clear that he was not in the war primarily just to free the slaves, but to preserve the Union. And he said there was no room for these rose-water philanthropists in this age of iron. "The one question presented to every young man now is," he wrote, "is there any valid reason why I should not go to the war? Not necessarily as a private, but in some capacity. We want officers with brains as much as men with guns. You may tell him so from us, and God knows we have as much right as anyone, from duty done or sorrow endured, to speak with authority on this matter." The following month, despite repeated requests to be posted somewhere closer to home, Bowman learned that he was being sent even farther away, to St. Louis, Missouri. He fired off a letter to the Surgeon General and told Hannah to appeal to their cousin, Congressman Alley. "If these measures will not avail, I shall resign, bitter a disappointment as it will be, to my hope of serving honorably with the Army until the war is over. God alone knows how much we have borne in the last 3 years, and I do not regret it. It was duty, but there is a point beyond which endurance ceases to be a virtue. If I came home, we shall find something to do. Better to live on a crust than to endure the agony of such a separation."
The order was countermanded, and Bowman was at home in Lynn on February 3rd, 1864, for the birth of their third child, Alice. Near the end of 1863, Bowman had been made medical director at Yorktown, Virginia, a decided move northward, but the reprieve was only temporary. And in February, he was in St. Louis, where he was now in charge of the 1,200-bed Gratiot Street Prison Hospital. He wrote home to describe his new post. St. Louis is now strongly for the Union and emancipation, but the western and southwest portions of the state are infested by guerrilla bands who rob and burn and murder indiscriminately. Both sides are alike. One is as bad as the other, and both have got to be put down with a strong hand. I fear this will be the condition of much of the South for years. It will take a generation for this bad blood to cool. That spring, Hannah and Alice joined Bowman. When he was transferred to Nashville 2 months later, she and the baby followed him to Tennessee. He took charge of U.S. General Hospital No. 1, the city's largest, housed in a captured Confederate armory atop College Hill. Alice seemed to thrive at first, and at 7 months she was already trying to walk. So it was a brutal shock when the baby died in October. It was nearly 2 weeks before Hannah could muster the will to write to her mother-in-law. God has taken her and again left our hearth desolate, and we have constantly to say to our hearts, be still, and one prayer, help us, O Father, to say, thy will, not ours, be done. Her only consolation was that we were and we are together to comfort and sustain each other.
The couple were still in Nashville when they learned of President Lincoln's assassination. Our whole sky seems black with grief, Hannah wrote home to Danvers. I did not see the troops when the news of Lincoln's murder reached them, and they were ordered to their respective quarters with reversed arms, but their appearance is said to have been sad beyond description. Many were filled with rage and swore revenge, and it was with difficulty that they were restrained. 6 men were shot in the course of the day for expressing satisfaction at the president's death. One poor fellow in the hospital, a medical cadet, when told by the boys that Lincoln was killed, remarked that he did not care. He didn't know as it made any difference to him if he were. Whereupon they seized him and dragged him to the hydrant for a ducking, and there is no knowing to what excesses they might have gone had not Bowman interfered. He allowed them to strip off his straps and made him beg pardon on his knees, and afterwards sent him under guard to the penitentiary. But in consideration of his weak-mindedness, Bowman has since recommended that he be released and sent from Nashville. Bowman and Hannah remained in Nashville for several months following Lee's surrender. He was mustered out of the service in August 1865 at the rank of brevet lieutenant colonel. Bowman once again resumed his seat on the school committee, but duty to his country soon called him away again.
That fall, Hinks, now a brevet major general, had arranged for the purchase of the bankrupt Togus Springs Resort Hotel. They called it a home, but most referred to the new facility as the United States Military Asylum. On October 6, 1866, Bowman arrived at Togus with the first inmate, English native James P. Nickerson, who had been living in Hannah's hometown of Danvers when he was drafted as a private. He'd served as a musician in the 19th Massachusetts, Hinks' old unit, and had contracted rheumatic fever during the siege of Petersburg, Virginia. It was an interesting arrangement. Inmates must have been disabled in the line of duty to such an extent as to render them incompetent to obtain a livelihood by labor in the ordinary walks of life. They also had to be honorably discharged. Nickerson and others would be required to do such work as they were fitting for. And while they were paid for the work, those who did not have families to support were required to turn over their pensions for the use and benefit of the asylum. Military discipline was to be maintained, and another rule that must have pleased the teetotaling head surgeon and his wife: strict sobriety and correct deportment will at all times be rigidly enforced.
Hannah soon joined Bowman in Maine, and the couple settled into their new home. This is a letter he wrote in December. We have had some bitterly cold weather, but with good bright stoves, our rooms are perfectly comfortable, Bowman wrote to his mother in December 1866. The brook in front of the house was frozen nicely, as good ice as I ever saw. We had a good bonfire and all went out and enjoyed it. This morning, we are having a good old-fashioned snowstorm, but it blows too hard to make any good sleighing. Our inmates come slowly, but one of the managers writes that there has been some mistake about transportation. When that is rectified, they will arrive more rapidly. Your box of good things came safely to hand and proved very acceptable. We gave some of the pies to the inmates and eat the pudding and pies at dinner. Their daughter, Marion, was born there on December 20th, 1866. By the summer of 1867, there were 200 veterans living at Toves.
Then on January 7th, 1868, disaster struck. A fire, likely from a defective heater, broke out in the main building. There were about 300 inmates there at the time. Bowman took charge of the evacuation, and the local newspaper recorded the scene. Those who were able to move themselves escaped to a place of safety, and the sick were brought out on mattresses and laid for want of shelter in the snow. All suffered from a cold and piercing wind. A barrel of whiskey kept in the surgeon's department for medical purposes was taken from the cellar and drank by the soldiers to such an extent as to make some of them beastly drunk and others wild with fury. Disgusting scenes of disorder and violence ensued. Amazingly, only one man, weak from disease and suffering from exposure, died en route to Augusta. The facility was almost a complete loss. All but one staff member was let go, and the Breeds returned to Lynn. In June 1871, Hannah gave birth to a son, Preston.
Bowman was elected to the Board of Aldermen in Lynn and then to the State House of Representatives in Boston. He had also resumed his medical practice, but by July of 1872, effects of the malaria he contracted while serving during the war in the South forced him to switch to a less taxing occupation, that of a newspaper publisher. On December 16, 1873, Bowman died of Bright's disease. He was just 41 years old. My grandfather, Nathaniel Pope Breed, was born 2 months later. To support herself and her 3 young children, Hannah would be forced to return to teaching and to take in boarders in their home. She also carried on for a time as proprietor of the Lynn Reporter, our local newspaper at the time. Hannah never remarried. She died on February 11, 1915, at the age of 86. According to my grandfather, her last word was Bowman. Whether it was his service during the Civil War or simply the uprightness of his too short life, Bowman Breed set a standard to which generations of our family have aspired. My grandfather, Nathaniel, served as an army doctor in France during World War I. My father, Dr. Robert Thompson Breed, was a PT boat officer in the Southwest Pacific during World War II. And my oldest brother, Dr. Putnam Pope Breed, served in a MASH unit in Vietnam, an experience that turned his light brown hair to a solid white. 4 straight generations of fighting physicians. Thank you for your service. To show you something. This is the sword, courtesy of my cousin Alan Breed Pooler, that Bowman carried during the war. And it's inscribed with the U.S. medical staff, and it's in that first picture of him that I showed you on the screen. And here's our book. You can get it on Amazon. Thus ends the shameless self-promotion portion of our program.
So thank you. Before you step away, though, let me first present you this token of our appreciation, and then I'd like to present you each with a coin as well. Thank you very much.